English translation. 404th contact, Saturday, 12th November, 2005, 21:39 hours.
You are early today, which I told Ava, but I thought you would not be here until 10 hours. And it is just about an hour ago now that the earth shook, as you already predicted on the 29th of October. However, be welcomed and greeted.
My greetings to you too, my friend. Yes, I come a little early today because we should get on with our work.
Of course, but what I want to say is that today we talked again in our correction work regarding false contactors, as well as alleged channelers and cheats in the matter of extraterrestrials. Could you please say a word about the contradictions between my photo and film material and today's computer technology? Which I think you could also say something about the slander against me, which can also be traced back to my dear ex-wife. Perhaps I think Hans-Georg could then integrate your statement into his new book. What is your opinion?
That is what I want to do, whereby I will speak in third person and agree that my words should find admittance into Hans-Georg's book. The exact place we will look for together look here, because in Chapter 18 it can be inserted if you ask him if he agrees with it. Then I will now explain the following. Since the 1940s, Billy has been in contact with extraterrestrial human beings, especially with us Pleiadian, and all the countless attempts to convict him of lying and deceit or fraud and charlatanry have failed miserably, and that for more than 60 years. And since all these attempts have always been fruitless, malicious slander was created, emanating not only from his own wife and supposed friends, but also from envious ones, know-it-alls, critics, and other adversaries who had never seen him face to face and had never spoken to him. Billy's photo and film material takes us back to a time when today's computer technology was not even in its infancy. When he took and shot his photos and films, the photo and film industry was so costly in terms of tricks and special effects that they could only be carried out by well-financed photo and film studios. For Billy alone, it would have been financially unaffordable to produce trick photos and animation films in such good and perfect quality as this one was created by him. Not to mention the fact that he never had a studio and the necessary equipment for it, and also no knowledge of photo and film technology. Further obstacles would have been his wife, who constantly watched him jealously and suspiciously with eagle eyes, and who would have exposed him in public out of hatred and desire for renown. If she had been able to detect irregularities, fraud, lies, or swindling in him in any wise. Useless attempts at slander on her part were nevertheless made at an early age, and these did not end even after the divorce of the marriage. On the other hand, how could he, as a one-armed man, have handled all the technologies that would have been necessary to make trick shots? But how could he, for example, also have hung models of beam ships in the open air, because it can be proved that all photos and films were taken by him in places where nothing but the open sky above the objects is visible, with a few exceptions, where the beam ships circled around weather pines, and that large objects and not small models were photographed and filmed. This was proved by a U.S.-American research team on the spot, as well as by expert analyses by scientists in the USA. Nevertheless, opponents around the world tried to denounce Billy as a swindler, liar, and cheat, or simply as a charlatan. Thus, slanderous articles, writings, and books were written, and even TV movies were produced to compromise him, to which even his wife maliciously reached out her hand, as well as so-called longtime friends who joined the said family member, although they themselves had experienced many things during the years regarding the real existence of our beam ships and regarding unexpected encounters with us. Even impossible slanders which could not be more ridiculous, have been set up, and even books have been written and published about them. For example, by a certain Cal Korff from the USA, who claimed that Billy, as a one-armed man, had built a 7-meter model of a beam ship and transported it on his small motorbike to those places where the photographs and films were taken. According to the defamations, these models were then allegedly hung on balloons or lifted up by helicopters. Other untenable slanders were spread by Billy's wife, such as that he had prepared container lids, etc., and photographed them as beam ships. In fact, the forms of the slanders took such ridiculous forms that it is surprising that adult individuals fell for it, alleged UFO experts who thought and still think they were. Malevolent people did not shy away from outrageously falsifying Billy's photo and film material and putting the falsified material back into his hands, without him noticing, or directly distributing it worldwide with the claim that it was original footage. The falsifications were partly made so clumsily that even laymen could recognize them as such. The whole thing ultimately led to worldwide hostility against Billy, who was thereby defamed as a swindler, liar, cheat, and charlatan, which was only too willingly and maliciously exploited by self-important know-it-alls, adversaries, envious people, enemies, and self-proclaimed experts, etc.
Thank you for your explanation. Hans-Georg will certainly agree to include the whole thing in his book. Shall I ask him by phone?
It is already 22:38 HRs. Do you not think he is already sleeping?
He is also half a night bird, so he is probably still working on the book or something else.
Then please ask him and give him my regards.
I do. Just a moment. You want to record the conversation?
No, that is not necessary.
Then not. Okay, short conversation with Hans-Georg. As you have heard yourself, he agrees to include your statement in Chapter 18.
Then we will do it so. But here I see an article of yours on the table. May I read it?
You mean that one?
No, this one, What is a Sect?
Of course you can read it. It is nothing that's a secret. Willem Mondria gave me the idea because he asked me how to define a cult. Something in writing would be good in that respect. So I got stuck into it. So you can read.
The writing is good. Would it be possible to include this article in the book by Hans-Georg as well? It would be a good explanation.
The article is not quite finished. Unfortunately, I had to leave work again and had to leave it.
When you finish it, I want to read it again, but I think it will be good for Hans-Georg's book. Next Tuesday, I will come back here for proofreading to finish the last chapter together with you.
Then I will wait until then and finish it so you can read the rest as well. Maybe it would also be good if I would add the article to this contact meeting. What do you think?
You should do that. But now, Edward, I want to talk to you without the conversation appearing later in the conversation reports.
There is nothing to object to, and besides, I have no questions today that would be worth mentioning in the conversation reports.
What is a sect?
The term sect, in Middle High German secti, comes from the late Latin language, and in the sense of sector meant philosophical teaching, or direction, or school. Followed principle, in Old Latin sequi, which means to follow. In Latin, according to Plejaran records, the term sequi, or sect, was a neutral term from the Old Lyran language with regard to a political direction, and thus the forerunner of what is today called a political party. Contrary to the meaning of sequi, as to follow in Old Latin, The term in Old Lyran meant followers. Later on, in ancient Latin, the term sequi was used in an extended form to include secessionist groups of philosophies and religions, and was also interpreted as a direction or following. Today, the German term Sekte from sequi is usually a negative term in relation to a community. The current problem with the term sect is that it is used on two fundamentally different levels. In the theological language, especially in the main Christian churches, it is used to denote the secession from a mother religion, and thus a special religious grouping, which as a rule represents its own religious rituals and rituals foreign to the mother religion, as well as religious beliefs that often reach as far as fanaticism. Very often the sects are based on new sources of revelation, whereby media such as channelers, etc. play the main role, who in a trance, etc. allegedly want to be in contact with Jesus Christ, with God personally as well as with saints, angels, high spirits or extraterrestrials and those of other dimensions, etc., and receive from them quasi-messages which determine sect faith and sect rituals. Other sects practice an overestimation of individual aspects of faith, but it is inherent in all sects that they know the only true path to salvation, that is to say, to salvation or to the happiness of humanity. The fundamental point here is that the doctrine of salvation offered by each sect must be believed and must not be questioned in any wise. Thus, the basic principle of every sect is also that its doctrine of salvation has sole validity, is free of errors, is eternally stable, and is the perfect. A totalitarian attitude is given through all behavior, forcing the believers to humility and self-abandonment. In colloquial language, a sect is usually defined as a group of people whose members are highly fanatical about their beliefs and thus highly ideologized, and are thus deprived of their own opinions and decisions. Sects only accept their own unchangeable worldview, which is valid for them alone and for all times, whereby, however, other and non-religious groups, such as philosophies and other ideologies, must also be included in the concept of sects. Thus, sects know in their faith and in their worldview only the totality, namely that only their view is the absolute truth and that this is unchangeable, whereby all progress is prevented and cannot be given in the truth. Every form of a sect is always aimed at creating and teaching a self-imagined truth that goes to a certain point and no further. Thus, the effective truth cannot expand, although it is inexorably expanding through constantly new perceptions and insights, through knowledge, as well as through new knowledge and new experiences, as well as through new experience and newly emerging wisdom. Thus, every truth is never totalitarian, but unstoppably changeable with all the new things that constantly arise, whereby the truth always remains relative. Thus, every totalitarian doctrine is based on an evil falsity and error, for as life itself goes on, and as every night is followed by a new day, once a truth has been found, it is followed by its continuation in relation to new aspects of truth that are added, whereby the truth is always expanding and never comes to a standstill. Sects of all kinds, however, know only a stagnant or stagnating truth, and consequently for them, the truth is not expandable and not progressive. The use of the term sectarian is very helpful in defining the phenomenon of sects and their circumstances, because it describes the attitude by which a group or community becomes an effective sect, namely, the uncompromising fixation on one's own philosophical, religious, or ideological doctrinal system, which is in any case classified as fanaticism. This is the basis for the postulation or the unconditional and indispensable demand for religious or ideological absoluteness. whereby the claim to an absolute and eternally constant universal validity is raised. Connected with this is the unwillingness and inability of sectarian dispositions to grant truth-relevant insights to dissenters and apostates dropouts. Dissidents, which means that dissenters, etc., are practically too lowly intelligent and dim-witted to gain truly truthful insights. It is typical sectarian intolerance and group egoism, which excludes non-members of the sect. No sect tolerates dissenters in its circles, but only believers in its own sectarian doctrine, whereby deviations in questioning and doubting the facts of the truth of the whole are not allowed and are cursed as free spirits and heresy. As a result of the negative connotation of the term sect, the word has been replaced by a neutral term, especially in religious studies, such as denominations, special religious communities or new religions, etc. But this does not alter the fact that each sect represents a totalitarian and sectarian doctrine with an unalterable and non-extensible truth. Sim Ya Se, Silver Star Center, 15th November 2005, 00:58 hours, Billy.